In our world, everything is constantly changing. Humanity never stands still and is always striving forward. Some cities develop rapidly, while others turn into abandoned and forgotten places. In this video, I invite you to explore abandoned cities, islands, and structures from all over the planet. Enjoy watching. The ruins of Bannerman Castle are the main attraction of the uninhabited Polypel Island on the Hudson River in New York State. The story of this structure began in 1900 when Francis Bannerman, a military surplus dealer, purchased Polypel Island. He used the land as storage for his growing business. Bannerman already had a warehouse in New York City, but it was insufficient, so in 1901 he began constructing an arsenal on the island. The buildings were primarily used as storage facilities for military surplus, but Bannerman also decided to build his own residence on the island, resulting in the creation of Bannerman Castle. Over the next 18 years, Bannerman's business continued to expand, leading to more warehouses being built on Polypel Island. Construction ceased only after Bannerman's death, and in August 1920, 200 pounds of munitions and gunpowder exploded in one of the auxiliary buildings, destroying much of the complex. Following Bannerman's death and the explosion, military surplus sales declined. A powerful storm in 1950 marked the final blow for the arsenal's closure. Today, the ruins of Bannerman Castle are owned by the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. Since 2004, the island has been open for guided tours. In the 1860s, the family of Belgian Count Liedekerke Beaufort approached English architect Edward Milner for help building a new castle. The Count already owned the ancestral fortress of Vèvres, but it had been built back in the 13th century. Inspired by the neo-Gothic architectural style, Beaufort wanted a modern castle. The construction of Chateau Miranda began in 1866 and lasted for 9 years. However, during the building process, Edward Milner passed away, and the Count had to find a new architect to complete the project. Ultimately, French architect Pelchner was appointed to lead the construction. Chateau Miranda became a magnificent castle, with its centerpiece being a 56-meter-high central tower adorned with a crest and clock. During World War II, the castle was occupied by German forces, while the Count's family stayed in their ancestral fortress. After the war, the Count leased Chateau Miranda to Belgium's Ministry of Transport, which used it as a summer camp for children. In the 1970s, the ministry attempted to return the castle to its owners, but the family refused. In the 1990s, investors were sought to transform the castle into a luxury hotel, but no one wanted to take on the project. Ultimately, the Belgian government decided to demolish Chateau Miranda. The Island of the Dolls, located near Mexico City, is considered one of the creepiest places in the world. Being on this island is genuinely frightening as thousands of dolls hang from the trees. Visitors often report feelings of fear, anxiety, and a strong urge to leave. But how did so many dolls end up on the island? And why does it have such a negative aura? According to legend, the island was uninhabited until the 1950s when a young hermit named Julian Santana Barrera moved there. He lived peacefully in solitude until one day he heard a girl's cries from the canal. Julian rushed to help but was too late. The girl had drowned. All that remained was her doll, which Julian hung on a tree as a keepsake. Afterward, the girl's spirit began visiting Julian, asking for more dolls. To appease the spirit, he kept bringing more and more dolls, but it was never enough, and the ghost continued to visit him. Over time, Julian went mad and began disfiguring the dolls, hoping to rid himself of the spirit. But his efforts were in vain. In 2001, an elderly man's body was found in the same canal. Locals believe it was Julian Barrera. Today, the island is a popular destination for tourists looking for a thrill. The history of Bodie, located in California, began in 1859 when a prospector named William Bodie discovered a large gold deposit 20 kilometers from Mono Lake. That same year, he died in a severe blizzard, and 2 years later, his relatives decided to establish a town at the site and named it after him. In 1876, another gold deposit was discovered near Bodie, and the town began to grow rapidly. Within 4 years, the population increased from 30 to 10,000. The town boasted 65 saloons, breweries, a printing press, churches, temples, and even a railway station. Bodie became a thriving settlement, but also one of the most crime-ridden towns in the region. Daily crimes, including murders, were a common occurrence. Over the years, gold mining significantly declined, and people began moving to other mines, causing Bodie's population to shrink. By 1900, only 1,000 residents remained, and in 1917, the railroad leading to the town was dismantled. Despite losing its permanent population, mining operations continued in Bodie until the 1960s. Today, the ghost town is a popular tourist destination. In 1982, 6 futuristic dome-shaped structures appeared on the shores of the Gulf of Mexico, 90 kilometers off the coast of Cape Romano in Florida, USA. Their owner was Bob Lee, a retired American oil man. The unique home consisted of 6 sturdy, interconnected concrete structures. The total area of the house was 220 square meters, featuring 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. Bob Lee personally oversaw the construction of his unique dwelling. He even purchased a barge specifically to transport construction materials. Interestingly, before building the house on Cape Romano, Lee constructed an exact model of his future home on land in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Unlike the main structure, this model still exists today. Initially, the retired oil man planned the house as a coastal retreat for himself and his family. However, for unknown reasons, he decided to sell the property in 1984. A few years later, the new owners faced financial difficulties, and the house returned to the Lee family. Then, in 1992, Hurricane Andrew struck the island. Although the structure survived the powerful storm, the house was no longer habitable. In 2005, Bob Lee sold the property again, this time to Naples resident John Tosto. Lee advised the new owner to build a seawall, but Tosto refused and decided to move the house instead. However, just a few months after the sale, Hurricane Wilma hit Cape Romano, submerging the structure underwater. Despite never becoming a permanent home for people, the dome house transformed into a unique artificial reef, attracting marine life. Located 30 kilometers from Colombia's capital, near the 137-meter-high Tequendama Falls, is the beautiful, yet eerie abandoned building of Hotel del Salto, shrouded in numerous mystical legends. Since ancient times, the area around the waterfall has frightened indigenous people, who believed it was inhabited by spirits from other realms. Former Colombian President Pedro Nel Ospina Vázquez likely did not believe in such legends, as he personally chose this location in the late 1920s to build a mansion in the style of a French chateau. Later, the mansion was sold, and its new owner decided to turn it into a hotel. It quickly became popular among wealthy visitors, which isn't surprising, given the breathtaking views of the waterfall and picturesque surrounding nature. The hotel operated for several decades, but due to environmental problems with the Bogotá River, tourist numbers declined, and the hotel closed in the 1990s. It is said that the hotel is haunted by numerous ghosts. Locals claim it was closed because of these hauntings rather than environmental issues. But where could these spirits have come from? According to local legends, many murders took place in the hotel, though there is no official evidence to support this. In southern Italy, 50 kilometers from Matera, lies the abandoned commune of Cracco, perched on a 400-meter cliff. The story of this ghost town began as early as the 6th century BCE, when ancient Greeks built a fortification on the cliff and lived there for some time. Afterward, the cliff remained uninhabited until the 8th century CE, when settlers arrived in the area. For centuries, Cracco saw little development as its inhabitants frequently suffered from earthquakes and raids by invaders. However, everything changed in 1040, when a French baron decided to build a large castle on the cliff, complete with a rectangular tower, narrow battlements, and high walls. In the late 11th century, The castle and surrounding lands came under the ownership of Archbishop Arnoldo di Tricarico. By the 12th century, Krakow was captured by the army of Duke Roger II of Apulia, but was soon governed by Baron Eberto. During his rule, Krakow began to flourish, with numerous houses and other buildings constructed within the settlement. The commune was limited by its location on the cliff and the rocky terrain, which made agriculture nearly impossible. As a result, Krakow remained a small settlement with a population of no more than 2,000. People might have continued living there to this day, if not for a devastating earthquake in 1963. The disaster destroyed most of the buildings, and the residents were evacuated to a nearby commune called Krakow Peschiera. Villa Epecuén was a very popular tourist village located on the shores of the Salt Lake Epecuén in Argentina. However, it is now referred to as the Argentine Atlantis. The resort was established in the 1920s. The large number of visitors was due to the lake's healing waters, which were often compared to the Dead Sea. By the 1960s, Villa Epecuén attracted over 25,000 tourists annually. Luxurious world-class hotels began to appear in the village, making it a renowned vacation spot for Hollywood actors and wealthy businessmen. Villa Epecuén reached its peak popularity in the 1970s. Hotel owners earned large profits and paid locals well for their services. At that time, the village boasted the highest standard of living in Argentina. However, all good things tend to come to an end. Climate changes in South America led to constant heavy rains in Villa Epecuén. Over a decade, the rainfall far exceeded normal levels, causing Lake Epecuén to overflow. The dam couldn't handle the water volume and collapsed, resulting in the near-total flooding of the resort. This is why the village was nicknamed the Argentine Atlantis. Rainfall levels normalized only after 2008, and now some tourists return to the village to admire the abandoned buildings that have re-emerged from the water. The deserted city of Sanji is located near Taiwan's capital, Taipei. This city was established in the mid-1970s and was intended to be a resort for American military personnel stationed on the island, as well as for influential businessmen and investors from China. The design of the city's structures was truly unique and eye-catching. Most of the buildings had a futuristic appearance, resembling flying saucers. All of them belonged to Taiwanese construction tycoon Yuko Cho, and their design was created by Finnish architect Matti Suronen. The idea of new housing in a picturesque town seemed very appealing to investors, but the grand construction project was frozen just 2 years after it began, and Yuko Cho later declared his company bankrupt. But what caused this downfall? It is believed that paranormal phenomena began occurring during the construction, as if higher powers were opposed to the resort being built in this location. These rumors were not baseless. Many workers died during the construction of the city. As a result, people began refusing to work with Yuko Cho's company. Surprisingly, in the 1980s, construction resumed, and Sanji was officially opened. It seemed that the resort would finally succeed and become a popular vacation destination, but fate had other plans. Unfortunately, the properties in Sanji never found owners, and the project was ultimately abandoned. Almost every country has its share of abandoned cities or islands. Italy is no exception. In the Venetian lagoon, 600 meters from Lido, lies the abandoned island of Poveglia. This place is considered one of the most eerie and mysterious in the country, which attracts many tourists. According to legends, the island is home to numerous ghosts. Such stories did not arise without reason, as Poveglia witnessed the deaths of a vast number of people. The grim events on the island began in the Middle Ages, when it was chosen as a quarantine zone during a plague epidemic. Thousands of infected individuals were sent there daily, and it is said that over 160,000 people died on the island during that time. Given the high number of deaths, it is not surprising that Poveglia became a haven for spirits. However, the events related to the plague outbreak were not the only grim chapter in the island's history. In 1922, a psychiatric hospital was opened on Poveglia. Its chief doctor was reportedly cruel and heartless. Visitors to Poveglia often report hearing terrifying screams and moans, even though no one has lived on the island for a long time. Some claim to have seen ghosts warning them to leave while they still can. In 1997, near Japan's Yamanashi Prefecture, an unusual amusement park called Gulliver's Kingdom was opened. It was built in a picturesque location with a view of the active stratovolcano Mount Fuji. The park's construction was part of a special government program aimed at boosting the country's economy. It was intended to attract many visitors, not only with its creative design and sculptures, but also because of its proximity to Mount Fuji, which draws over 20 million tourists annually. However, the park was short-lived and closed just 4 years later. The reason for Gulliver's Kingdom's failure remains unknown. Many believe that tourists and locals avoided the park due to its proximity to two unsettling attractions: the infamous Aokigahara Forest and the village of Kamikushiki, which housed the headquarters of a major Japanese cult and a nerve gas production facility. Today, Gulliver's Kingdom is an abandoned theme park visited only by those interested in exploring deserted places. In Roscoe, New York, lies the fascinating yet abandoned Dundas Castle. The story of this structure began in the early 1880s when architect Bradford Lee Gilbert decided to build a summer home for his family. The design of the house's facade was inspired by Scottish castles, as Gilbert's wife was originally from Scotland. After the architect's death, the mansion was put up for sale. In 1915, it was purchased by Ralph Wirtz Dundas, who decided to completely rebuild the house, transforming it into a fairy tale castle. Dundas started an ambitious construction project, but passed away in 1921 before it could be completed. The castle was inherited by Dundas's daughter, Muriel. Thanks to her, the work on the mansion was finished, but she soon married and moved to England, leaving the castle unoccupied. In the early 1950s, the property was acquired by local Freemasons, but it has never been used as a residence. Many legends surround Dundas Castle. According to one, the ghost of Ralph Wirtz Dundas's wife haunts the property. Others claim that during a full moon, the 3 heart-shaped ponds on the grounds fill with blood. Regardless of the truth, the castle is considered cursed, as it has never found a permanent owner. The story of the unusual settlement called Fordlandia began in the 1920s, when Henry Ford, the owner of automobile manufacturing plants, sought new ways to obtain rubber. Initially, he planned to produce rubber in Central America, but then the governor of the Brazilian state of Para allocated a vast plot of land, covering over 10,000 square kilometers, to Ford's corporation. In 1926, the construction of Fordlandia began. Henry Ford envisioned it as the perfect town for workers involved in rubber production. The city was completed and first populated in 1928. By then, Fordlandia already boasted schools, hospitals, playgrounds, shops, and even a golf course. By 1930, the city's population reached 10,000 people. While the city grew rapidly, the strict rules in Fordlandia backfired. The town was meant to be a model American settlement. Residents were prohibited from eating traditional Brazilian cuisine, smoking tobacco, drinking alcohol, or engaging with women of questionable repute. These rules were strictly enforced, but the workers were unhappy with such restrictions, and a rebellion eventually broke out. Although the authorities relaxed some of the rules, it didn't help, and by 1934, most of Fordlandia's residents had left. The Fordlandia project turned out to be unprofitable for Henry Ford, and in 1945, his grandson sold the land to the Brazilian government. Hutuan, a Chinese village on one of the Shangsi archipelago islands at the Yangtze River estuary, draws tourists seeking a magical atmosphere where civilization merges with wild nature. Local residents abandoned this settlement over 30 years ago, and today all the houses are overgrown with ivy and other vegetation. Hutuan was founded in the 1980s and once had a population of 2,000 people. The location was chosen intentionally, as the settlers were fishermen and the area was rich in fish. The village flourished, with a small port built for fishing and cargo ships, facilitating fish trade. Unfortunately, in the early 1990s, fish stocks significantly decreased, and fish prices in Shanghai markets also dropped. As a result, fishing became unprofitable, and people began leaving the village. Eventually, Hutuan's population shrank to 30, prompting Chinese authorities to cut off transportation routes to the settlement. Those remaining were completely isolated and ultimately left as well. Thus, the once bustling village turned into an abandoned place, where only the structures remain as a testament to human presence, though they are gradually becoming one with nature. Throughout history, countless cities and settlements have been established. Many of them have thrived for centuries, while others have survived to this day. Yet there have also been towns that grew rapidly and were abandoned just as quickly. Many such settlements are found in China and Japan, for example the famous ghost towns of Ordos, Tianducheng, and Hashima. However, other parts of the world also have their share of abandoned towns. In this photograph, you can see a ghost town in Australia. Looking at this image, many of you might think that this town sank into the ground or was a mysterious object buried under desert sands, now uncovered by the weather. Unfortunately, it is impossible to say for certain what this town was, why it was built, or why it became abandoned. All we can do is speculate. The ruined Italian-style mansion Whitley Court, located in Great Whitley, is a unique landmark in the English county of Worcestershire. The house was built for the Foley baronial family in the 17th century, designed by British architect John Nash. Every aspect of the construction, from its facade to its interior decoration and furnishings, was meticulously planned to exude luxury. In the 19th century, the mansion was sold to the Earl of Dudley, who decided to undertake a major renovation. For this purpose, he hired architect Samuel Dawkes. As a result, the estate became one of the greatest palaces of Victorian and Edwardian England. Unfortunately, at the end of World War I, the Dudley family faced severe financial difficulties, forcing them to sell the house at a very low price. The mansion's new owner was a carpet manufacturer from Kidderminster. However, even he did not make the house his permanent residence. In 1937, a massive fire severely damaged the mansion. The estate was once again sold at a low price, and most of its furniture and valuables were simply stolen. Finally, in 1972, the remnants of Whitley Court and its gardens were entrusted to the Department of the Environment. A major restoration was carried out, which successfully restored the exterior of this magnificent structure. Perhaps one of the most famous abandoned cities in the world is Pripyat, located in Ukraine's Kiev region. Residents of this city did not want to leave, but they were forced to, because on April 26, 1986, a major accident occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, resulting in one of the largest man-made disasters in human history. Once the scale of the disaster became clear, all residents of Pripyat were evacuated. Needless to say, people didn't want to leave their homes forever. Pripyat was a young, promising, and rapidly growing city. It was founded in 1970, and by 1986, its population had reached 47,500. In the last few years before the disaster, the city's population was growing by more than 1,500 people annually. Pripyat had everything necessary for comfortable living. Among educational facilities, the city had 15 kindergartens with nearly 5,000 spots, 5 schools for 6,800 students, and a vocational school. Pripyat also had 3 clinics and 1 medical facility. There were shops, cafeterias, restaurants, cinemas, an amusement park, and much more. Today, Pripyat remains abandoned, and its streets occasionally see tourists who come to immerse themselves in the desolate atmosphere of the deserted city. One of the main attractions of Homebush Bay near Sydney, Australia, is the so-called floating forest. It is the remains of the former military supply ship SS Airfield, which is now entirely overgrown with lush greenery. Swaying in the wind, the ship truly resembles a floating forested island, especially from a bird's-eye view, hence its name. The SS Airfield was built in England in 1911. During World War II, it served as a supply ship for American forces in the Pacific. In 1972, the ship was decommissioned, but was not dismantled like most other early 20th century vessels. Instead, it was abandoned in Homebush Bay. Over time, the SS Airfield began to rust and deteriorate, and mangrove trees started growing inside it. The remnants of the ship eventually transformed into a dense green forest. Interestingly, there are several other old ships nearby, but none of them have turned into a floating forest. Kolmanskop, located in Namibia's Namib Desert, was founded in 1908. The history of this settlement began when a railway worker discovered small diamonds in the sand during the construction of a German railway from Lüderitz to Keetmanshoop. The news quickly spread among mineralogists and mining engineers, sparking illegal diamond mining along the railway. In response, German Minister Bernhard Dernburg began regulating the illegal diamond trade. Under his orders, two towns, Kolmanskop and Elizabeth Bay, were built near the railway, where mines were located. Kolmanskop was named after Coleman's Hill. Diamond mining grew rapidly, as did the city itself. Within a few years, large houses, schools, hospitals, shops, restaurants, and much more had been built. In just 5 years, this desolate desert area transformed into an exemplary German town. Interestingly, Kolmanskop was home to Africa's first horse-drawn urban railway. Of course, living in the desert was challenging. The town often faced dust storms, and fresh water had to be transported from Lüderitz. However, the reason Kolmanskop was abandoned was entirely different. Over time, the nearby diamond deposits were depleted. In 1926, a new, rich deposit was discovered near the Orange River. Kolmanskop's residents gradually moved to the new town, and by 1956, the city was completely deserted, buried under sand. Near the Thames estuary in the North Sea off the coast of England, you can see unusual abandoned structures. Most tourists are unaware of their purpose, but locals know that during World War II, these platforms served as vital defensive installations. Monsell forts were built in 1942, designed by civil engineer Guy Monsell. The forts consisted of 7 reinforced concrete towers based on floating concrete pontoons. The central tower housed radar equipment and fire control systems, while 5 artillery towers were equipped with 94 mm QF Mk2C anti-aircraft guns and 240 mm L60 Bofors anti-aircraft autocannons. The 7th tower, located separately, was fitted with a powerful searchlight for target illumination. The support towers had 7 floors, with 4 housing the fort's garrison, and the remaining floors used for generators, fuel, freshwater supplies, ammunition storage, and other necessities. 4 forts were constructed in total, 2 of which remain today. Although decommissioned in the 1950s, they played a crucial role in defending Britain against Luftwaffe attacks. Ross Island, located in the eastern part of the Indian Ocean in the Andaman Archipelago, is completely abandoned today, despite its rich and fascinating history. The island's colonization by Europeans began in the 18th century when British explorers discovered the Andaman Islands. The South Andaman Island was the first to be settled, followed by others in the archipelago, including Ross. Decades later, Lieutenant Archibald Blair decided that the remote island could serve as an ideal site for a penal colony. However, the initial attempts to settle the island with prisoners failed, as all of them contracted malaria and died. Despite this failure, in 1857, when the Andaman Islands came under the direct jurisdiction of the British Crown, Ross Island became a place for political prisoners. Locals referred to it as Black Water due to the inhumane conditions prisoners endured, while Europeans called it the Paris of the East. Many British officers dreamed of being stationed there with their families. Ross Island gradually transformed, with luxurious houses, swimming pools, schools, hospitals, and more being built. Meanwhile, prisoners cleared forests and constructed buildings, enduring the horrors of working in year-round heat and high humidity, often facing attacks from indigenous tribes. Today, Ross Island is completely abandoned. This was caused by a strong earthquake in 1941 and the subsequent Japanese occupation during World War II. And that's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Your support is the greatest reward for me. Thank you for watching and see you soon. Goodbye.